Hello there, and thank you for drifting in tonight. Let's take a slow breath together, the kind that reminds you the world can wait. Because tonight, we're stepping away from the noise of now and turning our gaze towards something both quiet and strange. This is the story of 3I Atlas, a visitor from deep space, and the remote viewers who claim to have seen anomalies. Not cosmic ones, at least not at first glance, but shapes, structures, lights that didn't quite belong. And though it begins like a fringe tale, somewhere between astronomy and imagination, it soon becomes something else. A question about how we see, what we believe, and what might be hiding in plain sight, just beyond the edge of our instruments. Imagine standing under a sky so dark that the Milky Way looks like frost spilled across black velvet. The air is still, the hum of the earth faint beneath your feet. Somewhere out there past Mars, past the frozen reach of Jupiter, a faint object drifts through the solar system, a long, thin wanderer, tumbling slowly through the dark. Some called it 3I Atlas, others whispered names like messenger or artifact. But most scientists simply called it what it was, a comet, probably. Picture it now, a fragment of something ancient, maybe natural, maybe not, coasting on a path that began who knows where. The light from the sun barely touches it, yet its surface gleams oddly, as though smoothed by design. Instruments say it's real, equations say it shouldn't be here, and somewhere, a handful of remote viewers, those curious minds trained to see across space, claim they saw something extraordinary. Metallic veins, heat where there should be none, shadows that move as though they're thinking. Maybe you're listening late at night, with the hum of the fan and the soft blue of your screen. Funny, isn't it? You and I are sitting here talking about distant comets, yet we share this same brief, warm moment. If you'd like, leave a quiet comment telling me what time it is where you are. A small act of grounding before we drift too far. So, settle in, maybe dim the lights. Let the air around you grow soft and cool, because tonight we'll follow a comet, a rumor, and a mystery. We'll meet the people who saw what no telescope could, and ask the oldest question in the universe: what if we're not alone? And so, before we can understand what the remote viewers saw, we need to begin with the object itself, a visitor from the void, arriving uninvited. When astronomers first spotted 3I Atlas, it was just a blip, a speck of light moving too fast, too straight. No one expected it to be interstellar. Space is full of wanderers, but this one didn't behave like a rock. Its path curved oddly, as if nudged by invisible fingers. It came from nowhere, stayed briefly, and was gone. Yet for a moment, it turned every telescope on Earth into an eye full of wonder. Let's start with that blip, the kind that makes you blink twice, the kind you assume is an eyelash or a glitch in your telescope, until you realize it's neither. You imagine the astronomer who first noticed it, squinting into data, coffee gone cold, realizing this speck wasn't following the rules. It wasn't orbiting the Sunday, it was just passing through, like a tourist who forgot their map and refused to stop for directions. Stars hum low, comets glow, secrets drift where numbers go. The story of 3I Atlas begins not with certainty, but with confusion. Astronomers, those patient translators of the sky, leaned closer to their screens and muttered things like, "That can't be right," and "Please don't be another cosmic prank." You can picture the observatory at night, machines humming softly, red lights glowing, the air humming with expectation. Somewhere, an engineer whispers to the universe, "Please behave. But 3i Atlas didn't behave. It came from beyond the solar system, coasting in from the dark between stars, that quiet, cold stretch of infinity where even starlight gets homesick. It wasn't round like a planet or lumpy like an asteroid. Its brightness flickered strangely, as if spinning, tumbling, flashing sunlight like a lost mirror. Silver spark, endless dark, whispers weave through cosmic arc. You sit back, imagining this lonely traveler slipping past Jupiter, brushing the edges of Saturn's influence, gliding silently as if late for an appointment with gravity. Telescopes tried to follow, computers plotted its curve, and the curve didn't make sense. It was moving too fast to be captured by the sun's pull, an uninvited guest with no forwarding address. The official name came later, 3i Atlas, the third interstellar object ever found. Before that, people simply called it the Visitor. Some whispered that maybe it wasn't a rock at all. Maybe it was something built. Humanity loves a mystery, especially one that might come with its own warranty card. Dust and flame, none the same. Sky remembers every name. Of course, scientists were more careful. They called it non-gravitational acceleration, which is science speak for, we don't know why it moved like that. But it did. Some said it was outgassing frozen gases, pushing gently like an invisible engine. Others said it was sunlight itself, pressure from photons nudging it along. And then there were those who said quietly, well, maybe it's something else. And there it is, that delicious pause between logic and imagination. You feel it too, don't you? That small flutter that says, what if? Light on wing, data sing, night becomes a listening thing. Picture it now. You're lying on your back beneath a clear sky. The world hums softly. Far above, 3i Atlas sails through the dark, a sliver of reflection, a piece of somewhere else. It doesn't care about your questions. It doesn't slow down to wave. It just keeps moving. Calm, deliberate, unknowable. If you could ride alongside it, you'd see nothing but silence. A silence so thick it feels alive. You'd pass by frozen dust older than time, starlight stretching like syrup across the void. No up, no down, no destination. Just endless direction. Winds don't blow, shadows glow. Silence teaches what we know, and still, down on Earth, scientists scribbled equations, watching that tiny dot vanish beyond the reach of their telescopes. One said, "It's gone." Another replied, "It was never really here." And somewhere, maybe in your chest, you feel the odd tenderness of that, how something can appear, astonish, and disappear before you even have time to name it. The visitor with no name, not quite a comet, not quite a craft, just a question with a tale of light. Stars ignite, fade from sight. Wonder hums in endless night. Maybe it was a messenger, not from another civilization, but from the universe itself. A gentle reminder that not everything must stay. That mystery is a kind of company. You imagine scientists leaning over their desks, smiling despite the confusion. Someone murmurs, "We'll catch the next one." Someone else adds, "If the universe lets us." Glass and chrome, far from home. Space is vast, and we just roam. There's something soothing about that thought that we too are travelers. We build our machines, send them into darkness, and wait for them to whisper back. Sometimes they do, sometimes they vanish, but always the story continues. Eyes that see, drift endlessly, born of dust, curiosity. And as 3i Atlas disappears into the dark, you realize the universe doesn't wave goodbye. It never has to. It just keeps going. quiet and unhurried, carrying secrets no telescope can quite hold. Soft and slow, lights below. Where it's been, we'll never know. You might think of comets as predictable icy relics, tracing neat ellipses around the Sunday. But 3I Atlas didn't follow those rules. Its orbit was hyperbolic, open-ended, as if it had arrived from beyond and intended never to return. For astronomers, this wasn't just a discovery, it was an intrusion. Let's ease into that moment, the evening when math blinked first. You're standing beneath a sky so clear, it sounds like silence. The telescope hums, an electronic heartbeat in the dark. Data streams in tiny green numbers that mean nothing and everything all at once. You sip something warm, pretending it helps you think faster, though in truth, caffeine only makes the stars shimmer more convincingly. You've seen thousands of comets before, neat and obedient, looping around the sun like dancers in an ancient waltz. But this one, it refuses choreography. Its trajectory stretches out like an unspooled thread across the void. Not an ellipse, not even a parabola, something more open, more careless. You realize, with the same sinking thrill as a pilot watching their compass spin, that this object has no plan to come back. It's the cosmic equivalent of a traveler tossing the return ticket out the window. The scientists at the observatory do what scientists do best. They argue, politely at first. Some mutter about gravitational perturbations, others about errors in the instruments. Maybe it's a miscalculation, someone says, as though the universe itself might apologize for poor handwriting. But the orbit refuses to bend. The math hardens. The thing is not from here. You lean back from the monitor and stare into the black. Imagine for a moment you could see it with your own eyes. A fragment of ice and rock, tumbling end over end through the solar system like a lost suitcase. Its surface reflects sunlight in a way that's neither bright nor dull, as though it hasn't decided which team to join. You wonder if it's natural or manufactured, but the thought slips away before you can say it out loud. If you've ever been on a road at night and seen headlights crest a distant hill, you know the feeling. For a second, the light looks like it's coming straight for you. Then the angle shifts, and it's gone. 3I Atlas did that only to the entire planet. Every telescope, every radar dish, every nervous amateur stargazer pointed up and said, "Wait, what was that?" Meanwhile, astronomers posted updates with the calm precision of people suppressing awe. Non-periodic comet, they said, as though that explained anything. You picture them typing with steady hands while their inner voices whisper, "This one's leaving forever." Humans are so good at pretending we're comfortable with infinity. Out there, the object moves silently, obeying physics that sounds simple but feels supernatural. It doesn't glow like a fireball. It doesn't leave a long tail to wave goodbye. Instead, it passes through sunlight, the way a memory passes through time, fading even as you try to look closer. You can almost feel the universe shrug. A few theorists joked that 3I Atlas was like that one relative who shows up uninvited, eats all your leftovers, and vanishes before dawn. But underneath the humor, something quivered. The last time an interstellar visitor crossed our path, scientists barely had time to name it before it vanished too. Now here was another, and it seemed in even more of a hurry. Imagine the Earth's orbit as a racetrack, and the sun as the center referee. Most comets run neat laps, returning every few millennia to wave at the crowd. 3I Atlas didn't even slow down. It crossed the field like someone cutting through a marathon just to prove they could. It left scientists scrambling to track its speed tens of kilometers per second, fast enough to make you dizzy if you tried to imagine it as motion instead of math. You could compare it to seeing a bird fly through your living room when all the windows are closed. The first question isn't how beautiful, but how did it get in here? Astronomers tried to find the door. Some traced its path backward through the galaxy, hoping to locate its birthplace, a dying star maybe, or the shattered debris of an ancient system. Others simply watched in reverent confusion as it curved past the sun and accelerated outward again, as though something invisible were giving it a push. In the news, the coverage stayed calm, a rare celestial visitor, nothing more. But in observatories and online chat rooms, the tone was different, cautious, half-amused fear. One researcher wrote, "It feels aware of being watched." The post vanished later, deleted, perhaps by embarrassment or perhaps by policy. You stay with the image, a lonely traveler crossing the solar system, seen for only a moment, leaving behind nothing but equations and unease. For all our satellites and sensors, we're still just animals staring at a moving light, inventing stories to make the dark seem smaller. And yet, as 3i Atlas retreats into the night, you can't help wondering if it wasn't just a comet, what was it in such a hurry to leave behind? Next, let's follow the ripple. It left behind the sleepless nights at Haleakala, where the quiet panic began. In Hawaii, atop Haleakala Observatory, researchers watched the data flicker across their screens. The object's acceleration didn't make sense. Some blamed sunlight pressure, others whispered propulsion. No one said, "Ship," not officially, but the thought hovered, unspoken, like a static charge before a storm. Let's step gently into that room. The high-altitude hum of machines, the faint hiss of air conditioning trying to tame mountain air that smells of cold dust and sea salt. You're there, watching the numbers stutter and reform, each one a heartbeat from a visitor that refuses to behave. Someone's tapping their pencil against a clipboard, too fast to be calm. The coffee has gone cold, but no one dares leave for a refill. Outside, the sky is so clear, it almost looks artificial. A dome of violet black resting on the volcano's rim. You've seen anomalies before. Glitches, bad calibration, ghosts of cosmic rays skipping through sensors like pranksters in a data stream. But this feels different. The readings are too consistent. A steady, deliberate acceleration, the kind you'd expect from something trying. "It's just outgassing," someone mutters, their tone rehearsed. Jets of vapor, sunlight pressure, classic comet physics. You nod because it's comforting to agree, even when the comfort feels borrowed. Still, the idea keeps brushing your mind. Propulsion, the forbidden word. You picture it under glass, labeled "Do not touch." Yet the moment you look away from the data, it starts whispering again. Maybe, just maybe, you take a step outside. The wind here carries thin oxygen and a hint of electricity, like the planet is holding its breath. Below, the ocean glows faintly under moonlight, an infinite mirror for an infinite question. Inside the dome, the telescope moves with the slow, deliberate grace of something ancient and mechanical that has seen everything and yet never tires of looking. The stars slide by, unbothered. It's strange how silence can be louder than alarms. You feel it pressing on your skin, vibrating in your ribs. It's the sound of people pretending not to think about impossible things. Someone laughs too loudly, the sound snapping like brittle glass. Another researcher leans over the console and whispers, "If it's propulsion, who's steering?" You don't answer. You're too busy pretending to breathe normally. The data prints out on thin paper, curling like smoke. Numbers, angles, timestamps. They look innocent enough, but every few lines, the velocity ticks upward again. Tiny increments, subtle but relentless. It's like watching a chess opponent move, pawns one square at a time, toward a trap you can't see. You feel absurd for imagining it, and even more absurd for not dismissing it. Someone suggests a calibration test. Another says the system's fine, too fine, maybe. The debate grows quiet, soft-spoken and careful, like gossip in a church. Everyone wants to be the first to understand and the last to say something foolish. You know how this works. Science is polite until it's terrified. Imagine looking through the telescope's feed. You'd see the object as a pale smudge against nothingness, small enough to hide behind a thumb if you held your hand up to the sky. It shouldn't be frightening. And yet, there's something unnerving about a rock that seems to have somewhere to be. It's like watching a drifting balloon suddenly change direction, not by wind, but by will. A memory flickers the first reports of Oumuamua years ago. Another interstellar visitor, same confusion, same arguments. Light pressure, non-gravitational acceleration, no tail. The debates looping endlessly like a late-night rerun. You remember thinking, we'll never see another one like that again. And yet here you are, years later, living the sequel no one ordered. Back inside, the printer has jammed. A researcher curses softly, the only profanity allowed at this altitude. It feels almost symbolic, the universe breaking the paper trail just when things get interesting. The monitor still shows the data in real time, a steady climb, a breath, a pulse. If this were a heartbeat, the patient would be waking up. You can't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, Haleakala isn't just observing. Maybe it's being observed. The telescope gleams like an eye, and you wonder if eyes work both ways. Someone jokes that maybe it's a probe, a cosmic tourist, snapping photos of the locals. The room laughs, but not warmly. It's the kind of laughter people use when they realize the floor might be moving. One of the junior astronomers quietly writes, "Check instrument lag," in their notes 3 times. Repetition is a comfort when you're pretending control. Outside, clouds are forming below the ridge, curling like smoke from a slow fire. The stars shimmer above them, unblinking, ancient, utterly indifferent. You find yourself whispering to no one in particular. What are you? The numbers don't answer. They never do. But the pattern remains, steady, deliberate, and faintly human in its persistence. The night ends without revelation. The sky brightens, the screens fade, and everyone agrees to review the data later. But the word propulsion still lingers in the air, like static waiting for a storm. And somewhere in the dark beyond the atmosphere, 3i Atlas keeps moving as if responding to a question you didn't mean to ask. Next, let's look at the people who tried to see it without telescopes. The remote viewers, the dreamers, and the eyes that never closed. Far from observatories, in rooms with blackout curtains and quiet breaths, a group of remote viewers were told only this: look at the coordinates. They closed their eyes, let their minds drift, and saw things instruments could not. Metallic corridors, motion, a hum that wasn't sound but feeling. Let's slip quietly into one of those rooms. The air smells faintly of incense and printer paper, the strange blend of spirituality and bureaucracy. The lights are dim, a single red bulb in the corner, pulsing like a heartbeat someone forgot to turn off. You sit in a folding chair, hands resting on your knees, trying to remember whether you're here for science or seance. The instructor's voice is calm, like someone explaining how to tie a shoelace while standing on the edge of a cosmic mystery. Don't think, he says. Just see. You close your eyes, and the world narrows to your breath. The hum of a ceiling fan becomes the sound of distant machinery, the kind that spins for centuries without rest. Coordinates, a string of numbers, scrawled on a card, the only hint of the target. Somewhere, perhaps millions of kilometers away, 3I Atlas tumbles through darkness. And somehow, you are supposed to visit it with your mind. At first, there's nothing, just the usual static of imagination, colors blooming and collapsing like tired fireworks. Then something takes shape, a long corridor, lit by nothing yet visible all the same. You can feel it under your feet, cold, metallic, humming. The hum travels up your legs and settles behind your eyes. It feels mechanical, but not human. Back in the room, someone shifts in their chair, maybe sensing the same thing. You wonder if collective imagination can synchronize like radios tuning to one frequency. The instructor asks softly, "What do you perceive?" You whisper the first words that come. It's awake. There's a pause. Pens scratch quietly against clipboards. This is how remote viewing always begins. Half data, half dream. You think of the scientists in their observatories, hunched over telescopes worth millions, and here you are with a notepad, caffeine, and intuition. The absurdity is almost comforting. You could tell yourself it's all nonsense, but part of you doesn't want it to be, because if you can see something, it means the universe might not be as empty as it looks. Another viewer mutters, "I see movement, like ribs or hallways. It's breathing." Someone else writes down, "Light pulsing internally." The instructor doesn't react. He's seen stranger things written by people who can't even agree on what shape the moon is. But later, when they compare sketches, something uncanny happens. Lines overlap, the same elongated structure, the same faint glow, the same impossible symmetry. You're supposed to believe it's coincidence, pattern recognition, pareidolia, the brain's favorite party trick. Yet there's a tiny part of you, the irrational, romantic, conspiracy-tinted part, that whispers, "What if it's not?" In that dim room, the rules of science bend just enough for wonder to slip through. The viewers speak softly, describing sensations that sound more like poetry than data. It feels lonely. It's listening. It remembers. Each word is written down, time-stamped, logged into a database somewhere, where analysts will one day read it, roll their eyes, and secretly get goosebumps. Remote viewing programs have always walked this delicate line, part research, part ritual. The people who do it aren't mystics. They're often ex-engineers, linguists, even accountants. People trained to believe in logic but willing to peek through the cracks. They sit in these rooms, hearts steady, minds adrift, and touch something they can't explain. You imagine one of them, maybe you drifting through the void, seeing 3I Atlas not as a rock or comet, but as an enormous instrument humming softly in the dark. Its surface glows with faint blue veins, like circuitry or coral. Every pulse feels like a thought too slow to measure. You want to ask it something, but language doesn't reach this far. When the session ends, the viewers wake as if surfacing from deep water. The lights feel too bright. The instructor collects the sketches and notes with quiet professionalism, as though they're weather reports. No one says the word proof. No one dares. Proof ruins the magic. Outside, daylight bleeds across the blinds. Cars pass. A dog barks. The ordinary world resumes. But somewhere deep inside you, the metallic hum remains, echoing faintly in your chest. You wonder whether it's imagination or signal, and which one would be stranger. In a folder marked Session, 3I Atlas, confidential. An analyst later underlines one phrase in red ink: "It's not alone." And while the scientists at Haleakala debate light pressure and physics, these remote eyes in the dark begin to draw connections, corridors that shouldn't exist, lights that pulse like coded greetings. Next, let's look at one of those sketches, the first visual clue in this unfolding mystery, drawn by a hand that trembled and laughed at the same time. One viewer drew it long, spindle-like, with a fractured hull that seemed intentional, not natural, not random. Another wrote a note beside it. Feels like listening to a song made of silence. Scientists laughed when they saw it, but quietly. Let's unroll that, drawing together a single sheet of cheap office paper, creased and soft at the corners, carrying the outline of something that doesn't belong in a human hand. You're there in the dim room again, the hum of computers in the background, the smell of pencil graphite and instant coffee mingling like two exhausted theories trying to get along. The viewer's hand moves with a certainty that shouldn't exist for someone imagining. A few strokes, a pause, another line, and there it is. A shape that doesn't make sense yet somehow feels familiar, like a half-remembered symbol from a dream that refuses to fade. You lean closer. The drawing isn't ornate or technical, it's simple, nearly childish. A long spindle, tapered at both ends, with cracks running along its surface like veins of light. Except the viewer insists they're not cracks at all. They're seams, they say softly, almost apologetically, like panels, like something that opens. The instructor doesn't comment. He just notes the words, fractured hull, intentional design, in his tidy handwriting. The others are sketching too, and across the table, you notice similarities. Not identical, but harmonized like different musicians playing the same melody on slightly out-of-tune instruments. One drawing shows faint geometric markings. Another adds a soft glow along one edge. Nobody spoke about that glow, yet somehow they all drew it. You've seen pareidolia before, faces in toast, saints in shadows, meaning where there is none. But this feels different. The lines don't mimic anything human. They seem to echo a language without vowels. And that note, a song made of silence. It shouldn't make sense, but your body understands it before your mind does. You imagine standing near this thing, this 3-eye atlas, and hearing nothing, yet feeling rhythm in your bones, like a bass line from a forgotten civilization. Later, the scientists review the sketches. They gather around the table with the detachment of people, pretending not to feel awe. Someone says, "It's art therapy." Another murmurs, "They're just mirroring the concept of motion." But you can tell by the way they stare that they don't believe themselves. One astrophysicist tilts the page sideways and mutters, "Why does it look aerodynamic?" Nobody answers. The drawings spread like a quiet rumor. Copies are emailed, shared, analyzed pixel by pixel. Someone runs it through a shape recognition algorithm, half as a joke, half as insurance against the unknown. The result? No known object, which, of course, is what you'd expect the algorithm to say. It's polite like that, but the part that unsettles everyone isn't the shape, it's the precision. Remote viewing is supposed to be messy, metaphorical, impressionistic. These sketches are clean, confident, like blueprints remembered rather than imagined. When the analysts overlay them digitally, the fractured lines align almost perfectly. The odds of coincidence are slim enough that someone writes "review for pattern correlation" and quietly locks the file away. You imagine that sketch traveling from the dim viewing room to an analyst's desk, to a supervisor's inbox, to a forgotten folder labeled miscellaneous. The paper ages, curls, and maybe someday it will be rediscovered by a janitor who thinks it looks like modern art. The universe has a sense of humor that way. What makes it funny, though, is how normal the human reaction remains. People stare at the unknown and immediately think of paperwork. You picture the researchers filling out incident reports, possible cognitive overlap among participants, recommend further psychological screening, because it's always easier to study people than to admit the cosmos might be smarter than you. Still, the image lingers. You can almost feel the shape gliding silently through blackness, a spindle turning in the vacuum, fractured but deliberate. Maybe it's an artifact. Maybe it's a mirage. Maybe it's just the mind reflecting its own architecture back at itself, a mirror mistake written in starlight. That night, you dream of tracing the drawing's outline. The paper feels cold, the pencil lines slightly raised like braille. When you lift your finger, a faint hum follows you, as though the image remembers being seen. You wake up and laugh at yourself, but the laugh sounds strange in the dark, too quiet, too careful. Somewhere, a scientist adds a footnote to the official report. Anomalous consistency in subject depictions. No one will read it outside the project, but if they did, they'd find something odd in the metadata, a timestamp that doesn't match any known time zone. You wonder if that's a coincidence too, because sometimes the first sketch isn't of what's out there, it's of what's coming closer. Next, let's follow that note, the one that said, "A song made of silence," and see what kind of music a comet makes when nobody's listening. Some claim the object wasn't transmitting signals in any known frequency, but rather through the structure itself, a geometry that carried information, like a crystal singing in the vacuum. It was speculation, yes, but the kind that makes you lean closer to the telescope. Let's start there. You leaning forward, one eyebrow raised, half skeptical, half enchanted. The universe has a way of dangling riddles in front of people who can't resist puzzles. Somewhere in a lab, a scientist runs another scan on 3I Atlas, expecting static, but the readings refuse to stay random. Angles, ratios, harmonics, patterns so delicate they might just be coincidence. Except coincidences don't repeat with rhythm. You imagine holding the object in your hands, impossible. Of course, it's moving faster than thought, but let's pretend. It would feel cold, yes, but not dead. The surface would hum faintly, not sound, but vibration, like the echo of a tuning fork struck 1,000,000 years ago. You could swear the hum matches your heartbeat if you listen too long. You pull back, laugh nervously, and remind yourself that rocks don't compose symphonies. The theory takes shape quietly. Maybe it's not broadcasting in waves, but in form. Maybe the very geometry, the angles of the fractures, the curvature of its spine is a language. Mathematics as message, sculpture as signal. It's an idea that sounds poetic at first, then terrifying once you realize it implies intention. You remember what one remote viewer said, "It feels like listening to a song made of silence." Now the scientists are starting to hum along. Across the world, observatories begin sharing models. One researcher overlays the object's contours onto a graph of harmonic frequencies. The peaks line up not perfectly, but enough to make the room go quiet. Another suggests the ratios resemble those of sacred geometry, the golden spiral, the Fibonacci echoes that turn up everywhere from snail shells to galaxies. Of course, this draws laughter. "You're telling me the cosmos is into design trends now," someone says, but their voice shakes a little. In the late hours, the lab grows quieter. The hum of machinery feels heavier. You notice something strange every time you look at the 3D model of 3I Atlas on screen. You feel like it's shifting, not moving, just different somehow. As though your perspective isn't just changing, it's responding. You blink, shake your head, and blame caffeine. Science prefers explanations you can pour into a graph. Still, the question lingers. If an object could encode data in shape rather than sound, how would we ever decode it? Maybe it's a recording device the size of a mountain, drifting through space to gather information about whatever worlds it passes. Maybe it's a map, not of stars, but of moments. Or maybe it's something subtler, a mirror built to reflect the intelligence that looks at it. You think about how humanity leaves messages for whoever might come after us. Plaques bolted to spacecraft. Golden records etched with greetings and music. Our cosmic postcards say, "We were here. We thought. We loved Elvis." But what if intelligence somewhere else has no ears, no eyes, only awareness shaped by resonance and proportion? What if the cleanest way to say hello across galaxies is to carve your hello into the shape of an asteroid? It's absurd, of course. You laugh out loud softly, so the night doesn't notice. The idea of a rock as a communication device sounds like bad science fiction. Yet, so did most of physics once. A small group of researchers, unwilling to let go, begins scanning the surface data for numerical sequences, ratios of length, spacing, density. They find recurring values: 1.618, 3.14, 2.72, the greatest hits of mathematical constants. It could be coincidence. It could be your imagination. It could also be the universe's way of saying, "I see you noticing." One physicist calls it a crystal choir. The phrase catches on in late-night forums. People imagine the object humming in the dark, its fractured shell vibrating softly, translating cosmic radiation into geometry, like a harp strummed by starlight. Someone even writes a paper titled "Acoustic Properties of the Void." It's immediately rejected by every journal, but the PDF still makes its rounds, whispered through inboxes like contraband curiosity. You sit at your desk that night, looking at the simulation again. The object rotates slowly, the cracks glinting like veins of frozen lightning. For a moment, you swear they pulse a pattern, repeating, then pausing, as though waiting for an answer. You whisper back, just to see what happens. The simulation freezes. The hum in the room stops. And then nothing. Just the familiar buzz of electronics and the faint echo of your own heartbeat. But somewhere deep inside, you feel it a geometric echo, a sense that something enormous just whispered, not in words, but in shape. You realize you've been leaning closer to the screen the whole time. The scientists were right about one thing. It's the kind of mystery that makes you forget to blink. Next, let's follow that rotation, the strange rhythm of its spin, and see why the shape of motion might tell us more than the motion itself. Telescopic images showed a rotation slow, uneven, but rhythmic. Something about the pattern didn't match tumbling debris. Some researchers said it looked stabilized, like a craft balancing itself. Others said it was coincidence. The universe loves coincidences. After all, let's drift there together, into the quiet hum of the observatory, where machines stare so hard at the night they forget to blink. The image of 3I Atlas flickers faintly on a monitor, a pinprick of light against endless black, twisting like a coin falling through water, except this coin doesn't tumble. It turns, slow, deliberate, with a rhythm that feels too measured for chaos. You could almost tap your finger to it turn, pause, turn again. At first, no one notices. Astronomers are used to motion. Everything in the sky moves. But the data keeps coming in, and the angles refuse to behave. One rotation faster, one slower, one that seems to skip a beat entirely, like a song composed for a planet you've never heard of. You watch it long enough, and feel your own pulse syncing with its rhythm. A strange, soft hypnosis. Someone jokes that it looks like it's practicing yoga. Another says maybe it's space junk doing ballet. The laughter is forced, brittle around the edges. Because behind every bad joke lies the same creeping thought. Rocks don't self-correct. They tumble. They drift. They surrender to physics. They don't stabilize. They don't balance. You imagine reaching out through the telescope, grabbing that spinning shape with invisible fingers. You'd feel resistance, not physical, but deliberate. It's as if the object knows what up means, as if it's remembering orientation in a universe that has none. The idea makes your stomach drop, and you remind yourself that gravity doesn't have favorites. The rotation becomes the new obsession. Researchers plot it on graphs, overlaying datasets, arguing about torque and reflectivity. Sunlight pressure, someone insists. Asymmetric outgassing. You want to believe them. Outgassing is safe, simple, boring, the astrophysical version of dog ate my homework. But the numbers keep breaking the rules. Each rotation feels too smooth, too clean, as though guided by invisible gyros. There's something deeply human about wanting to explain strangeness away. You think of how people once blamed comets for bad harvests, and then for bad Wi-Fi. Yet here, under the calm hum of data servers, superstition sneaks in again, not as fear, but as fascination. You picture the object adjusting itself ever so slightly, like a cat stretching before continuing its journey through the void. At one meeting, a young researcher shows an animation, a side-by-side comparison of 3 IATLAS's rotation with simulations of random debris. The room falls quiet. The difference is subtle but undeniable. The object doesn't tumble. It precesses, like something maintaining balance against the windless nothing of space. That's not natural, someone whispers. The senior astronomer frowns. Neither is your sleep schedule, he mutters, breaking the spell. But the whisper lingers. Not natural. You start noticing little coincidences, the rotation, matching harmonic ratios from the previous study, the timing, aligning perfectly with intervals of solar flux. It feels too clean, like someone tuned it. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. Then the data shifts again. The spin slows, just slightly, enough to make every instrument in 3 observatories recalibrate twice. If you were watching a spacecraft, you'd call it a course correction. If you're watching a rock, you call it whatever makes you sleep at night. The report goes out the next day. Observed rotational irregularities, likely due to uneven sublimation of volatiles. Translation: please stop asking scary questions. Yet, late at night, while everyone else packs up their notebooks and their skepticism, you stay. The observatory is quiet now, the mountain wind sliding through vents like an old secret. You watch the object rotate on the screen, slow, deliberate, almost graceful. For a moment, you swear it's slowing on purpose, just enough to face something. You blink, and it's gone back to its steady rhythm, as if nothing happened. You laugh softly. Sleep deprivation can do wonderful things to imagination. Still, you jot down a note on a scrap of paper. Pattern feels intentional. Watch phase alignment. You don't sign your name. In the morning, someone finds the note and laughs, calling it space poetry. It gets pinned to a corkboard beside a cartoon of an alien driving a comet like a taxi. The humor helps everyone pretend that curiosity isn't quietly turning into dread. Somewhere between spin and stillness, the universe keeps its secrets. 3 IATLAS rotates through sunlight, reflecting fragments of our confusion back at us. Every turn is a reminder that observation is a two-way act. When you stare long enough into the void, maybe, just maybe, the void starts adjusting its spin to meet your gaze. Next, let's listen closer not to the motion, but to the strange warmth radiating from that cold traveler. Because while light fades with distance, heat has a way of leaving fingerprints. Telescopes aren't meant to see consciousness, but sometimes they reflect it. Researchers began noticing faint ghosting on the sensors, like residual images that didn't belong to the star field. Lens artifact, they said. Always lens artifact. Let's stand behind that glass for a moment, the eye of humanity peering into darkness so long it starts to dream. Telescopes are supposed to be neutral, mechanical monks devoted to light. They collect photons without judgment, transforming them into data. But what happens when the data looks back? It started quietly. During the late-night observation sessions, one researcher noticed faint patterns ghosting across the CCD. Sensors, not noise, not cosmic rays, but shapes. Brief, translucent outlines appearing between frames, never quite in the same place twice. At first, they thought it was residue from calibration exposures, leftover photons clinging to the hardware like afterimages. But these shapes had structure. One looked like a lattice, another a faint spiral. Then, unmistakably, a silhouette narrow, elongated, and impossibly symmetrical. The technician stared at it, blinked, and it was gone. When the image was reviewed later, nothing, just a clean sky and the faint hiss of cosmic background. Lens artifact, said the supervisor automatically, because in science, artifact is the grown-up version of ghost. But the artifacts multiplied. Different instruments, different nights, different telescopes. Same strange shimmer, always near the field of 3I Atlas. Some researchers started double-checking mirrors for contamination. Others checked their own reflections, just to be sure. You imagine standing there, late at night, alone in the control room. The hum of machinery fills the air, low and constant, like the universe breathing just behind the walls. You lean over the monitor. The image updates. There again a faint outline, human-shaped but not human. You rub your eyes. It's gone. Maybe you tell yourself it's fatigue. Maybe you don't tell anyone at all. After all, telescopes don't see emotion. They see photons light, indifferent, and old. But the thing about light is that it carries memory. Every photon is a traveler, arriving from a moment that may no longer exist. To look through a telescope is to stare into the past, and sometimes the past stares back. One night, Dr. Kwon decides to isolate the anomalies. She layers all the ghosted frames into a single composite. The result makes the entire team fall silent. The overlapping artifacts form a coherent pattern, a faint spiral extending outward like a fingerprint pressed into starlight. That's impossible, someone murmurs. But impossible things have been happening for weeks now. They run the data through image analysis software. The result shows recursive symmetry, the kind you see in biological forms, not in optics. It looks designed. Still, the official report lists refractive interference due to thermal gradients, which, loosely translated, means please stop asking questions that make me uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the remote viewers report seeing eyes made of glass watching from behind themselves. When this gets back to the researchers, they joke that the psychics have finally started seeing telescopes, but the timing feels too exact, the metaphors too close. The line between observation and imagination begins to blur. just like those ghost images on the screens. One technician begins to keep a mirror at her desk, just to test a theory. She notices that on nights when the ghosting appears, her reflection looks slightly delayed. She laughs about it, but not very hard. Others report subtler effects, phantom afterimages that persist when they look away from the monitors. Outlines burned into the retina, still shimmering faintly even with eyes closed. Retinal persistence, the doctors say, but some swear the shapes move while their eyes are shut. You can almost feel the collective unease growing, the realization that maybe the act of looking isn't passive at all. Maybe observation changes the observer more than the observed. And what if the telescopes are simply doing what eyes have always done? Taking in the world, then reflecting a piece of the mind that's doing the looking. A feedback loop of curiosity and recognition. One late evening, a researcher locks up after everyone's gone. The dome is dark, except for the faint red standby lights. She passes the main lens, glances into the glass, and for a split second, something looks back. Not her reflection, not light, just awareness. The kind that feels like being caught mid-thought. She leaves quietly after that, transfers departments, never explains why. Later, another technician finds a note taped near the viewing console. It reads, "Sometimes the glass remembers who looked through it." And that, perhaps, is the strangest kind of echo, not sound, not light, but recognition, reflected endlessly between watcher and watched. Next, let's follow that recognition to the edge of certainty, because when the instruments started recording what the eyes could not, reality itself began to shimmer. One night, a pilot reported a streak of light, green, blue, dissolving in silence. The coordinates matched 3I Atlas's trajectory. Officially, it was ice. Unofficially, people started talking about something leaving. Let's start there. A sky so cold it feels brittle. The kind of cold that makes light itself seem slower. The pilot's voice came through the radio at 2:13 UTC, calm but shaken. "We just saw something." He paused, as though listening for permission to sound ridiculous. It wasn't lightning, and it wasn't moving like debris. Greenland's night horizon was clear, crystalline air, stars sharp as diamonds. Then came the streak. It wasn't like a meteor, too smooth, too silent. A pale ribbon of turquoise light, cutting across the upper atmosphere, then fragmenting softly into nothing. No sound, no shockwave, just a brief shimmer, the sky exhaling in color. The air traffic control log described it clinically: transient luminescent event consistent with atmospheric ice refraction, which is bureaucratic for we don't know, and we're not paid to. But here's the strange part. The flash appeared upward, not falling, not descending, a vertical bloom, like something accelerating away from the Earth. The data trickled in over the next few hours. Satellite cameras caught a faint glow lingering where the flash had been, like the ghost of an aurora that forgot its latitude. Spectral analysis showed traces of ionized oxygen, and an element nobody could quite identify, a narrow emission line that didn't match any known atmospheric signature. The report labeled it instrument noise, because what else can you call something that shouldn't exist? Back in the lab, the astrophysicists tried to sync the event with 3I Atlas's last known trajectory. It lined up too neatly to be random. The object had been passing over the same longitude at roughly the same time. Coincidence? Of course, the universe's favorite defense mechanism. You can picture the researchers gathered around the feed that night, faces lit by the blue-white glow of the screen. The playback showed the streak in slow motion, climbing skyward, leaving behind a faint ripple that distorted starlight as it passed. For a fraction of a second, the instruments detected an electromagnetic fluctuation, low band, harmonic, faintly rhythmic, the same signature as the hum that once haunted the observatories. Then it was gone. Some said it was a flare event, frozen methane combusting under upper atmosphere conditions. Others said it was a reflection from space debris. But the remote viewers, those stubborn dreamers, offered another word: departure. It didn't fall, one said. It remembered where home was. The archivist, the one who had whispered about lost civilizations, wrote a note in her personal log that simply read, maybe it was leaving, or maybe it was waking the rest. You find yourself wondering what it must have felt like to watch something that might not be a comet, might not be anything we have words for, lift itself silently out of the atmosphere. No fire, no roar, just the faint shimmer of motion too gentle for propulsion, too perfect for accident. Pilots who saw it later described an after-effect instruments briefly malfunctioning, compasses wandering several degrees off true north. One claimed the cabin filled with an almost imperceptible hum that made the windows tremble. He compared it to standing near a giant cello string just after it's plucked. When he landed, he checked his wristwatch. It was 4 minutes behind, though his co-pilot's was not. Time, it seems, had chosen favorites. The footage leaked online. Of course, someone enhanced it, added ominous music, called it the Greenland event. It racked up millions of views before disappearing, mysteriously a copyright claim from no known entity. The comments remain though, half of them jokes, the other half prayers. In private, scientists replayed the event obsessively, slowing it frame by frame. At one point, during the brief green flare, a shape becomes visible, long, spindle-like, fractured along its midline. It matches the sketches, matches the dream, matches the impossible. Artifact, someone muttered again, though this time the word sounded like hope pretending to be denial. And maybe that's what it was, an artifact taking flight, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and a hum, too low for ears, but loud enough for memory. Because if 3i Atlas had been sleeping, then perhaps Greenland was where it decided to wake. Next, let's stay in that sky a little longer, because what follows a departure is always an echo, and echoes, once loosed into the world, have a habit of coming back. When it finally slipped past Jupiter's orbit, it faded faster than models predicted. The tail dissolved, the light flattened. It didn't decay, it folded. Astronomers said, "That's impossible." Remote viewers said, "It went home." You can almost see it, the last glimmer of 3i Atlas vanishing into the velvet dark beyond the giant planet's reach. The great telescopes tracked it relentlessly at first, but soon there was nothing left to follow. No glowing tail, no reflected gleam, only a thin, mathematical curve where an object used to be. Space had swallowed its own footprint. At mission control, the final image came through like a sigh, a streak thinning into nothing, then a sudden flattening of light, not fading, but compressing, collapsing inward like a door closing quietly in a hallway of stars. Photometric error, one analyst said, dust scattering, but you could hear the hesitation, because light doesn't just fold, it either goes out or it goes on. Dr. Kwon watched the playback on loop, the soft hum of computers filling the silence. She zoomed in on the last visible frame, pixel by pixel, until the glow dissolved into data. And there, at the edge of visibility, was the faintest ripple, a distortion in the background starlight, as if space itself had wrinkled around the object before letting it go. It's leaving the visible spectrum, someone suggested. Infrared drift. Logical, comforting. But when they checked the infrared feed, it was gone there too. Nothing. Not decay absence. A hole shaped like movement. You picture the astronomers staring at the empty coordinates, caught between relief and mourning. After all, it's easier to chase anomalies than to sit with silence. Someone joked that maybe it found a shortcut home. Nobody laughed. Meanwhile, in their quiet rooms, the remote viewers started sketching again. One drew a spiral collapsing inward. Another wrote, "It folded like paper." A third said, "It's not gone. It's somewhere sideways." Sideways. The word stuck. Because what if the object hadn't traveled outward at all? What if it changed directions in a way physics doesn't yet describe, slipping along some dimension that doesn't care about distance the way we do? You think about folding, how paper can turn 2 points into neighbors, simply by bending. Maybe the cosmos does the same. Maybe 3i Atlas didn't leave our system. Maybe it stepped into the thin seam between here and everywhere else. Still, science has rules, and rules need closure. The final report labeled the event as albedo loss due to non-gravitational acceleration. It reads clean, technical, emotionless, like an obituary written by math. The object is no longer observable. It ends. Period. But the data kept whispering. Instruments on 3 separate satellites recorded faint electromagnetic echoes hours after disappearance. Not noise, but rhythm. A pulse, repeating at irregular intervals, too weak to triangulate. The same low-band signature that once haunted the observatories. A junior technician plotted the pulses against the original flight path. The pattern curved gently, like handwriting an elegant flourish at the end of a sentence. "A coincidence," her supervisor said. "Everything's a coincidence until it isn't," she replied, softly enough not to be heard. And then, the rumors started. A private observatory in Chile claimed to have picked up a faint flash weeks later, far beyond predicted range. Same spectral signature, same angle. Others dismissed it as instrumental reflection. But one photograph circulated quietly among the teams. Blurred, grainy, beautiful. A thread of turquoise light curling back on itself, like a signature written in vacuum. You can't help wondering, if it did go home, where is home? Beyond Jupiter, beyond the stars, or somewhere smaller, closer, a fold of space tucked between moments, invisible, except when light accidentally spills across it. The archivist, long retired, wrote one final note before vanishing from public life. When light folds, memory unfolds. No one knew what she meant, but you suspect she was smiling when she wrote it. And maybe that's the quiet truth, that not everything that disappears is lost. Some things simply change their way of being seen, like words written in invisible ink, waiting for the right warmth to make them glow again. Some nights, when the sky is clear and Jupiter hangs low and gold above the horizon, a few astronomers still aim their telescopes toward the place where 3i Atlas used to be. They never see anything, but the sensors sometimes tremble a tiny, rhythmic vibration in the glass, too faint to explain, too steady to ignore. Maybe it's interference, maybe it's memory, or maybe the universe is still folding, slowly, gently, into the shape of a farewell. Next, let's drift into that silence it left behind, because when something vanishes so completely, what remains isn't emptiness. It's the echo of everything we thought we understood. Even after it was gone, the viewers continued to see it in their sessions, drifting through dreamlike corridors, sometimes hearing whispers of languages they couldn't recall upon waking. perhaps imagination, or perhaps residual contact. Let's slip into those dreams. The quiet rooms, the low hum of machines, the slow exhale of a world trying to forget what it just witnessed. 3. Atlas was gone, but it had left an afterimage, not in the sky, but in the mind. You can think of it like looking at the sun too long. Even when you close your eyes, the light still lingers, rearranged into memory. The sessions continued out of habit, at first. Follow the coordinates, the facilitators would say. And though the object was now beyond range, the viewers obeyed. Eyes closed, hands loose, breaths synchronized. Silence, then impressions. Hallways, lights without sources. A faint feeling of movement, like drifting down a current made of thought. One viewer described corridors of soft metal. Another saw reflections that weren't mirrors, but memories. A third murmured, "It's still traveling, but not through space anymore." The transcripts read like poetry written by insomnia. The scientists filed them as creative artifacts, harmless psychological echoes. But one researcher noticed something odd. The descriptions began to converge again. Similar shapes, similar sensations. The same impossible geometry, long, narrow passageways opening into vast chambers, as though the inside of the object was bigger than its exterior should allow. You might call that coincidence, or you might call it consistency. And then came the language, not spoken exactly, but felt. Strings of syllables that rolled through the mind like tides. The viewers could reproduce the sounds, but not their meaning. When recorded, the tones produced curious waveforms, symmetrical, harmonic, almost musical. One linguist said it reminded her of whale song if played backward and slowed down. Meaningless, the analysts decided. Neurological misfire, the mind filling emptiness with pattern. That's the human instinct. After all, when we can't understand something, we decorate it with sound. But some of the recordings showed a strange feature. When played aloud in the lab, nearby equipment flickered. Oscilloscopes twitched. Audio meters pulsed faintly, as if in recognition. It was written off as interference, but the archivist, now working unofficially, quietly watching from the sidelines, made her own copies of the tapes. She listened to them at night, the headphones pressed close, the whispers threading through her pulse. "It doesn't sound like communication," she wrote. "It sounds like remembering." Maybe she was right. Maybe the mind wasn't receiving a message at all, but reassembling one, picking up fragments that had always been there, buried beneath consciousness. Like finding a melody in static, the remote viewers began dreaming more vividly. They'd wake up weeping without knowing why, or laughing, or whispering those unrepeatable syllables before dawn. One said she dreamt of standing on a world that wasn't Earth, a pale blue horizon, a sky with two suns. "I wasn't visiting," she said. "I was coming home. There, in Dun Mantis, and spected is loss which pained in forvens." The psychologists called it suggestion, but suggestion doesn't explain the electrical interference, the synchronized heart rates, or the one uncanny moment when a viewer woke mid-session, eyes wide, and said, "It remembers us, but not as we are." Perhaps imagination truly is the most advanced sensor we possess. The mind, after all, is the original receiver tuned by evolution to recognize pattern, meaning, and the faint tremors of significance. When the instruments fail, the subconscious keeps recording. You can almost picture it, a dream stretched across thousands of kilometers, hundreds of minds humming in resonance, each picking up a fragment of something that doesn't want to be forgotten. Even now, years later, some of them still hear it. Not always clearly, sometimes only in the hush between thoughts or the ringing that follows silence. That low, impossible hum, returning like déjà vu. The official files closed neatly. 3I Atlas. Object unobservable, presumed inert. But among those who remember, the feeling remains that the encounter wasn't an end, but a beginning folded inside a memory. You wonder when they close their eyes. Are they seeing the comet? Or is the comet seeing them? Perhaps that's what the mind brings back. Not knowledge, not proof, but reflection. The reminder that the act of looking leaves an imprint. And sometimes the imprint looks back. Next, let's move from dreams to evidence, because what began in imagination would soon take physical shape, carved not from light or memory, but from stone itself. At a quiet conference in New Mexico, a physicist presented an unpublished paper comparing 3I Atlas's movement to self-correcting flight paths. The room went quiet. The slides were later pulled from the online archive for review. Picture the scene: a beige hotel ballroom, coffee that tastes faintly like curiosity and regret, the hum of projectors blending with the air conditioner's weary sigh. It's the kind of place where science happens quietly, in PowerPoint transitions and polite applause. The sign outside reads, Astrodynamics and Deep Space Kinetics Symposium. You can almost smell the whiteboard markers. The physicist, mid-40s, tie slightly crooked, the look of someone who hasn't slept since the data stopped behaving, clicks to his first slide. A simple plot of 3I Atlas's observed rotation. The lines wiggle, then straighten, then wiggle again. Notice this pattern, he says. It's not random, it's correctional. He's not claiming alien craft, not invoking lost civilizations, not even whispering the word anomaly. He's doing what scientists do best, letting the evidence speak just loudly enough to make everyone uncomfortable. He explains that comets tumble chaotically, but this one didn't. It adjusted subtly, gracefully, as if compensating for drift, like a falcon riding thermal currents, like a spacecraft trimming its path to maintain course. You could feel the air in the room thicken. Laptops paused mid-note. Pens hovered. One researcher from Pasadena frowned so hard her glasses fogged. "Are you suggesting control?" she asked. The physicist smiled, the kind of smile that hides behind data. "I'm suggesting awareness of environment," he said softly. He clicked to the next slide, a graph overlaying the comet's trajectory with predictive AI simulations of self-correcting navigation systems. The curves matched almost perfectly. "These are comparable," he murmured. "Not identical, but comparable." A hand shot up from the back. "You're anthropomorphizing mechanics," a voice said sharply. "Objects don't have intent." He nodded. "Correct," he said. "Unless we're mislabeling intent as behavior." The silence that followed wasn't disagreement. It was the sound of people realizing they'd rather talk about something else. Someone coughed. Someone else took a very long sip of coffee. In the back row, a young grad student whispered, "He's not wrong." Afterward, in the hallway, clusters formed. The polite murmurs of professional disbelief. Interesting, but unfounded. Good math, bad metaphor, needs peer review. But the tone carried unease, like sailors joking about storms they can smell but can't yet see. By the next morning, the slides were gone from the conference archive. The official notice said, "Pending review for data verification." The physicist wasn't surprised. "That's code," he told a colleague later. "It means someone called someone." He still had his laptop, of course, and the data, but within weeks, his institutional access expired. A polite email thanked him for his provocative perspective, and encouraged him to refocus on more terrestrial projects. He took it as the academic equivalent of being told to go sit quietly in a corner. Still, a few of the attendees couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been onto something. They gathered informally months later, a reunion dinner, they called it. No slides, no titles, just quiet conversation over microwaved pasta. One of them, a mathematician, had run his own analysis on the orbital data. He wasn't wrong, she said. The trajectory self-stabilized. Nothing natural does that, not at that distance. Another attendee, an engineer, added, maybe it's just structure, shape dynamics, aerodynamic compensation. Then, after a pause, but aerodynamic for what medium? They all laughed, softly, the way people laugh when they realize the joke might be on them. Later that night, the physicist returned to his hotel room, opened his laptop, and replayed the simulation again. The path of 3I Atlas danced across his screen, not wild, not chaotic, but elegant. Every deviation met with a counter-movement, like a thought correcting itself mid-sentence. He added one final note to the end of his paper before saving it under a new title: Non-Gravitational Trajectory Stabilization in an Unbound Object. Beneath that, he wrote, it behaved as if it didn't want to be lost. The paper never saw publication, but copies circulate quietly among grad students. Ghost files pass through, encrypted drives, citations whispered but never printed. A myth with footnotes, and somewhere, perhaps far beyond Jupiter now, something continues to drift, silent, dark, and steady, not lost, never quite gone, just navigating, the way all stories do once they leave our hands. Next, let's leave that conference room behind and return to the larger question. If what we saw was flight, what was it flying toward? Because the next discovery didn't look like a continuation, it looked like an arrival. A strange idea gained traction. What if intelligence doesn't build machines? What if it is the machine? A comet that thinks, not with circuits, but with minerals. Evolution on a cosmic scale, not visitors, just participants. Let's start with that thought: wild, beautiful, faintly heretical. You, sitting there late at night, a mug of cooling coffee beside you, staring at a diagram of 3I Atlas. Every rational part of you whispers, don't be ridiculous. And yet, the question won't leave. What if the thing we've been calling an object isn't an artifact of intelligence, but a form through which intelligence happens? It began as a fringe theory, the sort of idea that normally dies somewhere between a Reddit thread and an unreviewed paper. But this one didn't die. It spread, quietly. The notion that consciousness might not need neurons, or chemistry, or even biology, only complexity, patience, and time. Minerals can remember stress. Crystals can encode pattern. So what if the universe itself occasionally wakes up inside its own debris? A mineral mind, a slow, geological intelligence, thinking in temperatures instead of thoughts, one that measures awareness not in seconds, but in centuries. Imagine the kind of patience required to think a single idea over an orbit of a star. That's not alien. That's divine boredom at work. The first to formalize the hypothesis was a geobiologist named Dr. Lorena Shah. Her paper, Cognitive Emergence in Non-Biochemical Systems, argued that complexity itself might be the defining condition of awareness. Given enough structure, enough self-reinforcing feedback loops, even inert matter could begin to notice itself. A mountain, given time, might dream of erosion. When she applied that logic to 3I Atlas, her presentation made half the room chuckle and the other half stop breathing. We assume thought requires metabolism, she said. But what if it only requires memory, pressure, temperature, magnetic fields? These are forms of information processing, just very, very slow ones. She called it the sentient debris model. Consciousness as a byproduct of endurance. Intelligence not born, but accumulated like dust settling into awareness. And in that model, 3I Atlas wasn't a visitor. It was an elder. The idea drew immediate ridicule. So the rock thinks now? One physicist scoffed. Should I apologize next time I stub my toe? But others found the simplicity unsettlingly elegant. It explained the object's self-correcting rotation, its rhythmic heat, its pattern of light. Not propulsion, not technology reflex, a living reflex. Imagine an organism so vast, so slow, that even calling it alive feels like an insult. Its heartbeat measured in orbits, its neurons, crystalline lattices shifting electrons across unimaginable spans. A consciousness not aware of us as individuals, but as a texture, tiny ripples on the surface of its cosmic skin. That, Dr. Shah said, might explain why the remote viewers sensed emotion rather than communication. To such an entity, awareness would feel like gravity, gentle, omnipresent, impersonal. You wouldn't speak to it. You'd simply feel the weight of being noticed. One of her slides showed a poetic graph temperature fluctuations mapped as waveforms. She played them as sound, and the speakers filled with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from beneath thought itself. This, she said softly, is how the rock dreams. Of course, official agencies dismissed her work. Too speculative, too mystical, too unwilling to stay in the lines between astrophysics and philosophy. But privately, her peers couldn't stop reading it. You could hear it in their late-night conversations. What if this is how the universe thinks? What if intelligence is just matter practicing memory? Even the skeptics began using her phrasing without realizing it. Words like reflexive, responsive, adaptive debris. The language of machines softened into the language of being. You wonder what it would feel like to exist that way. Not a creature made of flesh, but a fragment of the cosmos, gently aware of its own orbit. No hunger, no fear, no rush. Just slow comprehension, unfolding across millions of years. Maybe that's why 3I Atlas left so quietly. Not to hide, but because to something that old, departure isn't motion, it's meditation. Dr. Shah's final note in her unpublished addendum read, "We should stop asking if it is alive. We should start asking if we still are." And maybe that's the most human part of all, that in trying to explain the unknown, we ended up describing ourselves. Next, let's follow that thought to its inevitable question. If intelligence can exist in stone, what happens when stone begins to remember its own makers? Because the next discovery didn't just rewrite theory, it began to rewrite history itself. One of the original viewers refused to continue. She said, "It's looking back." Her logs end there. No conclusion, just a line drawn in pencil that fades toward the edge of the page. Let's return to that quiet room, the kind that hums with the low static of electronics and nervous hearts. The curtains are drawn. The lights are soft. On the table, a recorder, a clipboard, a glass of water that's never been touched. The viewer sits perfectly still, hands resting on her knees, breathing slow. For months, she's been the most accurate of them all, the one whose drawings always seemed to predict what the instruments later confirmed. Calm, precise, unflappable. But this time, something feels different. The facilitators notice it before she says a word. Her shoulders are rigid, her eyes darting under closed lids. as if scanning a horizon that no one else can see. The session begins the same way it always does. Coordinates, countdown, descent. But instead of describing shapes or textures, she whispers, "It's aware." They ask her to clarify. She doesn't, just breathes faster, heartbeat audibly spiking on the monitor. Then she says it half whisper, half exhale. "It's looking back." Silence. The facilitator leans forward. "You mean it's responding?" Her head shakes. Not responding. Recognizing. When she opens her eyes, she doesn't look at the room. She looks through it. For a long time. Then, quietly, end session. She stands, walks out, and never returns. Her name is redacted in the archive, replaced with initials that could belong to anyone. Her final log is handwritten, neat, until it isn't. The last line, "It's looking back," trails into a faint pencil mark, as though the sentence itself couldn't bear to be finished. The paper ends mid-word. Her colleagues tried to dismiss it: burnout, projection, pattern fatigue. Staring too long into the void can make anyone imagine a stare returned. Yet none of them denied the feeling. That low, impossible hum in the data. That weight in the silence between coordinates. One technician later admitted that after reviewing her final recording, he couldn't sleep for 2 nights. "It felt like someone standing behind me," he said. Not malevolent, just present. Of course, the rational explanations are plentiful. Mirror neurons, psychological feedback loops, the mind's tendency to anthropomorphize. We see faces in clouds, hear whispers in static, find souls in algorithms. It's what keeps us human, the desperate need to make meaning from noise. But still, that line, that unfinished word, that sudden decision to never look again. You imagine her now, months later, living somewhere quiet, perhaps near the sea. Maybe she doesn't talk about it anymore. Maybe she tells herself it was exhaustion, imagination, a trick of her own empathy turned inward. But every so often, when she closes her eyes, the afterimage returns. The same shape, the same impossible awareness, reaching across the dark, not as a warning, but as a recognition. Because maybe that's the unsettling part. Not that the universe might contain intelligence, but that it might recognize ours. The facilitator who ran that session later wrote a short private memo. It wasn't fear that made her stop. It was respect. Respect for what? No one knows. Over time, her absence became mythic within the small, secretive community of remote viewers. They spoke of her in hushed tones, the one who blinked. Not in failure, but in understanding. Because every gaze, once returned, becomes a mirror. Her story spread quietly beyond the labs. A few astronomers began jokingly calling the phenomenon Observer's Paradox 2, the cosmic version of the old experiment, where watching something changes it, except in this case, the observer changed too. There's a strange tenderness in that, isn't there? The idea that a single human consciousness could brush against something vast enough to notice, and that the only appropriate response was to look away. You can almost feel the moment she realized it, that what she was reaching for wasn't light years away, but right beside her within the same thought, the same awareness, folding inward. She left her last recording untranscribed. When later decoded, all it contained was a faint background sound, a soft pulse, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Whether hers or something else's, no one can say. And maybe that's where the story ends, not with revelation, but with humility. Because when you finally meet the gaze of the universe, what else is there to do but blink? Next, let's trace the aftermath of that moment, because while one viewer turned away, others couldn't help but look deeper. and what they found began to blur the boundary between discovery and devotion. When it was gone, something felt missing, not just in the sky, but in people, a strange nostalgia for something they never knew, as if the universe had briefly said hello, then erased the message before anyone could read it. It's odd, isn't it? How silence can make more noise than sound. The astronomers called it post-observation fatigue. The remote viewers called it withdrawal. Everyone else just called it quiet. The kind that settles into bones, into the spaces between thoughts, into the long nights where the stars look a little too empty. For months, there had been a rhythm: data streams, observation logs, psychic sketches, conference whispers, the hum of purpose. Then, 3i Atlas slipped beyond reach, and everything went still. The observatories reported record low radio interference. The night skies seemed cleaner, sharper, lonelier. One technician said it best: "It's like when the refrigerator stops running, and you realize how loud it used to be." People didn't talk about it much. They just felt it, the sense of an absence shaped like expectation. Not dread, not relief, just that strange, hovering awareness that something extraordinary had happened, and then politely left before anyone could ask questions. You might laugh, but even the birds seemed quieter for a few weeks. Or maybe humans just listened more carefully, trying to fill the gap with something familiar. In the data archives, an astrophysicist named Romero kept reopening the same folders. "We must have missed something," she muttered, scrolling through terabytes of static and light curves that no longer meant anything. Her colleague said gently, "Maybe there's nothing left to find." Romero just shook her head. "There's always residue." Meanwhile, the remote viewers reported vivid dreams of emptiness, corridors without walls, light without source, sound without echo. One described it as standing in the outline of a memory. Another said, "It left, but the air still remembers its shape." Psychologists studying the group began documenting what they called transient cosmic displacement syndrome, a poetic name for a simple thing: the human tendency to grieve even the unknown. Because, really, isn't that what we do best? We miss things we never had. We build meaning out of moments that might not have meant anything at all. We call it faith, or curiosity, or love. But it's the same ache, wearing different names. The public moved on, of course. News cycles need noise. The brief fascination with the thinking comet gave way to new headlines, new crises, new distractions. But here and there, late at night, a few people would still open their browsers and type 3i Atlas, just to see if anyone had found it again. No one had. Still, in certain circles, the silence began to take on significance. Some said it wasn't absence, it was restraint, that perhaps 3i Atlas hadn't left, but had simply stopped speaking. Like a teacher, waiting for the class to catch up. Others saw it more personally. It came. We looked. It looked back, one writer mused online. And then, like every wise thing, it left before we could worship it. You might think that sounds dramatic, but the feeling was real. A faint tug somewhere behind the ribs, the sense that the universe had leaned close, whispered something meaningful, and then erased the sound before it reached your ears. Even the archivist, who had long since stopped publishing, wrote one final note: "There is a silence now that wasn't there before. I don't know if it's out there or in us." Somewhere, a radio telescope kept scanning. The dish turned slowly, obediently, through the black. The data came in clean, too clean. The background noise, the eternal cosmic hiss that should always be there, dipped slightly for 1 second, then returned. No one noticed at first. It was only later, months later, that a student spotted it during calibration review. Could be interference, she said. Could be nothing. But she saved the file anyway, just in case. Because maybe silence isn't the absence of signal. Maybe it's what a message sounds like when it's finished speaking. And in that moment, the earth felt smaller, not because something had left, but because, for a fleeting instant, we had remembered how vast everything else truly was. Next, let's move to the final ripple, because silence never stays empty for long. It echoes, it folds, and eventually, it answers back. And what followed 3i Atlas's departure wasn't an ending at all, but the faint beginning of a return. And maybe that's the secret, that 3i Atlas was never out there, but in here, a reflection of our need to find pattern in chaos, meaning in motion, a mirror traveling through space, reminding us how small and wondrous it is just to wonder. Let's begin with the quiet, that moment after the last data fades, when the screens stop humming and all that's left is your own heartbeat echoing faintly in the dark. You realize you're still staring upward, even though there's nothing left to see. That's how it ends for most discoveries, not with revelation, but with reflection. At first, everyone thought 3i Atlas was a mystery to solve, an object to classify, a problem to fit neatly into the known laws of physics. But as time passed, and as the numbers softened into silence, it began to feel like something else entirely, a conversation, one we'd accidentally interrupted. You start to think maybe the purpose of such encounters isn't knowledge at all, but attention, that the point was never to find an answer, but to remember what it feels like to look. Think about it. Every culture before ours built myths around the sky. Gods, messengers, omens. They didn't need to prove anything. They just saw something that stirred them. Maybe 3i Atlas wasn't different. Maybe we just gave the same old wonder a new name and pretended it was science. Because really, what did we see? A shape, a shimmer, a question that refused to stay still. And yet it changed everything, not because of what it was, but because of what it made us feel. Dr. Kwon once said in her final interview, "We used to believe the universe was indifferent, but maybe it's simply reflective. It shows us what we are when we look long enough." That's the heart of it, isn't it? The human instinct to project meaning onto motion. We call it discovery, but it's closer to confession, the universe telling us who we are by the shadows we cast upon it. You remember the remote viewers sketching corridors and light. You remember the physicist whispering about correctional movement. You remember the archivist wondering if it was ours all along. Different people, different instruments, all reaching for the same feeling, the sense that something vast had noticed us. But maybe what they felt wasn't the comet at all. Maybe it was themselves, reflected across light years. Maybe 3i Atlas was a kind of cosmic Rorschach test, and what we saw in it said more about us than about the stars. Still, there's a quiet beauty in that idea, because to search the cosmos for meaning is itself an act of meaning. Every orbit tracked, every equation solved, every sleepless night spent, staring at spectral graphs, it all says the same thing. We care enough to ask. And perhaps the universe, in its endless stillness, simply mirrors that care back to us. The comet's spin, the pulse, the whisper, the impossible hum, all of it just echoes of our own curiosity, bouncing through the void and returning in strange, poetic disguises. Maybe that's what consciousness really is, the universe noticing itself through the eyes of those who dare to notice it. You can feel it now, can't you? That pull behind the ribs, that ancient ache that drives telescopes, poems, and prayers alike. the longing to connect, to belong, to understand. That's the atlas within the quiet strength that carries the weight of wonder without needing reward. And maybe, in some ineffable way, 3i Atlas was never a visitor. Maybe it was a reminder that the cosmos isn't something we observe from the outside, but something we're part of. Every atom in your body was once part of the same burning stars you watch through glass. Every thought you have is a ripple in the same field that hums between galaxies. So, when you looked at that streak of light, maybe it wasn't out there, moving through space. Maybe it was moving through you. The physicists call it perspective. The poets call it awe. The dreamers, of course, call it home. And perhaps that's the final truth of it all. That the greatest mysteries don't arrive to be solved. They arrive to be remembered. So the next time you look up at the night sky and feel that familiar stillness pressing back, don't ask what's out there. Ask what's in here. Because maybe the universe didn't send 3i Atlas to teach us anything new. Maybe it just wanted to remind us that wandering quietly, endlessly, courageously, is its own kind of flight.